Hey everybody, today we are going to talk about non-qualified stock options. So I'm going to talk about what they are, how they're taxed, and different things to think about whenever deciding when to exercise them. All right, let's get started. So first, what is a stock option? So a stock option is a contract that gives you the right to buy a particular stock at a set price. And so whenever you're granted options, then on that option, you'll see something called the exercise price, or sometimes it will be called grant price or strike price. And so that is the price that you're able to buy the stock. And so the reason why, what makes it valuable is that as time goes on, and if this stock increases in value, say it becomes $15, then the fact that you can buy it for $10, but it's actually worth $15, gives you the value of the option. Another thing about stock options is that whenever they're granted to you, then there's going to be what's called a vesting schedule to it. And so that's saying that you can't actually use these options until you've met certain requirements. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to not really worry too much about the actual vesting schedule, and we're just going to assume that these 1,000 options have vested. And lastly, part of that option contract is there's going to be something called the expiration date, and usually that's going to be 10 years from the time that they're granted to you. Now that we've covered the basics of a stock option, let's talk about how non-qualified stock options are taxed. For non-qualified stock options, then the way that it's taxed is as soon as you exercise the option, then whatever that difference is between the exercise price and the actual price of the stock. So in our example, our exercise price is $10 and it's actually $15. And so for 1,000 shares, that's going to be $5,000 in value. And as soon as you exercise it, then that $5,000 is considered ordinary income to you. And so that's when you're gonna realize that as taxes in that year that you exercise. And so similar to your paycheck or a bonus, then your company is actually going to withhold taxes on this $5,000. And so they'll withhold money for federal taxes, state taxes if you live in a state that has income tax, and then Social Security and Medicare as well. And the last thing from a tax perspective is that since it is income as soon as you exercise, there's no idea of a bargain element and having to worry about AMT. So just to clarify that for non-qualified stock options, there's no AMT considerations at all. So now that we've covered the basics and how they're taxed, then really the big question is when should you exercise and sell them? And so there's a lot of different factors to think about. And so first we're going to talk about the factors that are related to the stock options themselves. So the first consideration, and this one might be kind of obvious, but I just want to make sure that we have a full understanding of this, is whether the option is considered in the money or not. Right? So saying an option is in the money, it's just a fancy way of saying that the actual stock price is above the exercise price, right? So that's saying that it has value, so it's in the money. But if the stock price actually gets below this $10 exercise price, then it's considered out of the money. And if you think about that, then basically your options don't have any value whatsoever, because if, say, the stock price was at $5 a share, then why would you pay $10 for something that is actually worth $5? Now that we have that covered, then really it's the question of how in the money do we need to be in order for it to make sense to exercise those options. And so the next thing that I'm going to talk about might get a little bit confusing, but I'll try to make it work, and that's something called leverage. So whenever we talk about options and talking about having the power of leverage, then here's what we're talking about. So if you look at here where if the stock is worth $15 a share and then it goes up to $20 a share, if you just concentrate just from $15 to $20, then that is a 33% increase in the value of the actual stock. But whenever it comes to the option, if you look at the value of the option, it went from $5,000 for the 1,000 options, and it went from being worth $5,000 to worth $10,000. And so from the option perspective, that actually went up 100%. That illustrates how there's kind of this exaggerated effect that happens with options. But what actually ends up happening as the stock price goes higher in the money, then that leverage power actually starts to decrease. So let me show you an example of that. So what I'm illustrating here is that, while I was saying from 15 to 20, the stock goes up 33% and the option goes up 100%. But so if we had the example of the stock was at $60 and then it goes to $80, then from the stock perspective, going 60 to 80 is still 33%. But from the option value, going from $50,000 to $70,000 is a 40% gain. And so you see how even though the stock is going up by the same amount, as the price of the stock gets higher, then the value of the option, that leverage, starts to decrease. So why does that matter whenever it comes to options? So like I was saying, that whenever the stock price is close to the exercise price, then that power of the leverage is a lot more potential, right? But then whenever you get well above the actual strike price, then the leverage kind of goes away and it starts to move a lot closer to what the actual stock would move. One last consideration specifically with the stock options is making sure that you keep track of what your expiration date is, because once you pass that, then they become completely worthless. So even if you're not that far above the exercise price, you want to make sure to exercise them and get something out of it before they just go away. So now that we've covered the factors specific to the stock options, then the rest of it is just the rest of your world and thinking about your personal situation. Something that's really common for people that are in tech and have equity compensation like this is the fact that their equity, like these stock options, it might represent a very large percentage of your overall net worth, your overall picture. And so the fancy term is called concentration risk. And so you might want to, if that's the case and you have a lot of your eggs in this one basket, then exercising and selling some of those options and diversifying that into other investments might be a good idea. And the next consideration is what your income expectations are. And so actually, before going into all those details, one thing that I want to be clear about is that with options, that the nice thing about them is once they vest, you don't actually have to do anything with them. You can actually just hold on to them and then you won't realize any extra income or anything like that. And so what I do with clients a lot of times, and what's really nice about options, is that you can somewhat control when you realize this income. And so, for example, if you're planning on taking a sabbatical and you're going to have a year where you're not going to be making as much income, then maybe it would make sense to not exercise those options while you're still working and your income's a lot higher, and you defer that to a year that you're on your sabbatical and your income's lower, or possibly your spouse is going to take time off, and so you're able to somewhat adjust that and play with those numbers a little bit so that you can it's primarily from a tax perspective, so that your taxable income is lower in these years whenever you're not working. The other outside factor to think about is if you actually need the money, right? So if it's something where you have an immediate need, where you're planning on putting a down payment on a house or something like that, and you need an extra $10,000, then there's nothing wrong with going ahead and exercising and selling the options in order to do that. Because, all of this stuff, it's really for the whole reason for it is for you to bring it home and turn it into the things that you actually care about and actually use it. The last question that I get pretty often is talking about once you exercise a non-qualified stock option, does it make sense to sell it right away, or does it actually make sense to hold on to it? And so the answer, in short, the answer is once you exercise it, then it generally makes sense to go ahead and sell it as well. And so the reasons for that is because, with non-qualified stock options, once you exercise it, then that's whenever the tax stuff happens, right? So there's no incentive for you to exercise and hold on to it for longer than a year like it is for incentive stock options, right? And so from that perspective, there's no tax benefit of holding on to it after you've exercised it. And then the other part is, if one of the main reasons why you're doing this is to try to reduce the concentration in this one stock, in this one company. And so if you exercise it but you hold on to it, then you still have all of that concentration. You're still in that one investment. And then lastly, whenever it comes to that leverage perspective, once you've exercised, then you've lost any additional leverage. You don't have that power anymore. And so for all of those reasons, as soon as a non-qualified stock option is exercised, then it generally just makes sense to go ahead and sell it right away. All right, thanks as always. Now you see with non-qualified stock options, it's more straightforward whenever it comes to the tax perspective, but there's still some planning things to think about as far as when to exercise them. And so hopefully this helped. If you like what you see, then please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, and I will talk to you guys later.